What movies come to mind when you think about horror in the 1990s? In a decade far away from streaming and before social media, still under the influence of the excess of the 80s, with increasing amounts of sequels, the rise of J-horror and apocalypse movies, the 90s had a lot to offer in the realm of horror. Now, if you were to ask me to mention a few horror movies from the 90s off the top of my head, I would probably go with Scream, Ring, The Silence of the Lambs, and The Blair Witch Project. Some of these we've actually spoken about in the past, but that's not what we're going to do today. We want to focus on the 90s horror movies that don't necessarily come to mind when looking back at that decade, the underrated or underwatched films. Now, what makes a movie underrated? Sometimes it's just a small movie that never really got a mass following after its release, or a first feature for a director, or a departure from what a director usually makes, or what's expected from the subgenre, or sometimes it's a film that got lost among the noise of other more popular movies. So with that in mind, we've prepared a list of 10 underrated horror movies that range in tone and subgenre but definitely deserve to be watched. But rest assured, there are no spoilers. The first pre-Lord of the Rings Peter Jackson film that I ever watched was The Frighteners. I remember that I didn't like its tone because for some reason, I was expecting something more serious. If I had gone in with an open mind, and also knowing that early Peter Jackson horror films had a tendency of going hard into the comedy and B-horror territory, I would have enjoyed it more. When it comes to Braindead or Dead Alive as it was released in North America, I suggest you do the same. A young man with serious mommy issues has just started going out with a young woman. While keeping tabs on the couple at the zoo, the young man's mother gets bitten by a Sumatran rat monkey. The bite causes her to get sick, die, and come back as a decaying undead creature that in turn infects others, threatening to turn the whole town into zombies. So far, nothing out of the ordinary regarding the description, right? Pretty straightforward zombie movie. Well, it's in the execution that things get really interesting. This is a balls-to-the-wall, insane splatter pick. It leans heavily into slapstick and camp. And just in case you're not exactly sure what I'm talking about, let me try to explain. Splatter films generally focus on graphic portrayals of gore and violence, something this movie has buckets of. Especially in the last third, where there was a point where I felt it was getting really excessive, but still fun and entertaining. Slapstick is usually associated with over-the-top physical comedy, and goes hand in hand with camp, which denotes a heightened theatricality, artifice, and exaggeration. You can see it in the close-ups, the dialogue, even some of the characters like the Nazi dentist, and the extremely violent ways people die. There are so many creative dismemberments, decapitations, impalings, you name it. One of the most bonkers moments during this crazy ride is the priest fighting off zombies and proclaiming,
"I kick ass for the Lord!"
So if you're not squeamish and just feel like turning off your brain for a little bit while watching a fun zombie movie that has a lot of disgusting looking practical effects, I think you should give this one a shot. Imagine it's 1992. It's Halloween night, you're surfing through the channels, and you happen upon an investigative report that's airing on the BBC. The subject is that a woman and her two daughters have been experiencing poltergeists in their home. Viewers are calling in to share their own ghost stories. The producers go back and forth between showing footage from the live investigation inside the house, commentary from a parapsychologist, and the opposing views from a skeptic. It seems like just another special interest investigation until things start getting weird, not only at the house, but also inside the studio. And the worst part is that there's no real way of proving that what you're watching isn't a hoax, and you might actually be inclined to believe that it's all real. That's actually what happened when Ghostwatch first aired, and it's also the reason why it only aired once in the UK. The producers had added credits at the start of the broadcast to hint that it was all scripted, but many people either didn't notice or joined in after the fact, adding to the confusion and panic. They were inundated with concerned viewers' phone calls. The context surrounding Ghostwatch elevates the content of the movie, but even without it, it's a pretty solid mockumentary / found footage film. The characters are believable, the family, the host, even the annoying reporter that keeps making light of the situation. They all make it feel real, which is what a good found footage film has to achieve. There are some scares that you expect, like the objects flying across the room or the possession voice, but what I appreciated was the attention to detail regarding the ghost. Just like the fake callers and the parapsychologist, you might find yourself seeing certain shapes or faces in some shots, then maybe convincing yourself that it was probably just an effect of a shadow or the lighting, until you see the face again as the camera pans around the room, catching a ghostly reflection, but not staying on it too long. making you question what you just saw. If you liked Late Night with the Devil, I think this movie might be right up your alley. I think the next movie on our list might be one of Wes Craven's lesser-known films because it came out in a time between two of his greatest hits, Nightmare on Elm Street and Scream, and it's also tonally different from those two. You'll have to prepare yourself mentally for a late 80s, campy, cheesy feel to a robbery gone wrong / home invasion film. The fact that it was loosely based on a real-life event made me want to check it out. The protagonist is called Poindexter, but everybody calls him Fool, after the Fool from his sister's tarot cards. He's just turned 13. His mom has cancer, and they're being evicted from their apartment. In order to come up with enough money to help dig his family out of their economical predicament, he and two men attempt to break into the landlord's house to steal their hidden gold coins. Once inside, they discover that the money isn't the only thing being kept locked within the house. This is a very well-written movie that doesn't stay static. The break-in, the discoveries, the escape attempts, the getting captured, the escaping from getting captured. It keeps you guessing, and it makes you wonder how it's all going to end. Brandon Quinton Adams does a very good job, especially at such a young age, at playing this resourceful kid that wants to help his family. Then he's in way over his head, and puts his life on the line to help a victim of the landlords, who you might recognize as also playing a couple in Twin Peaks. Although they might come across as a bit mustache-twirly evil, you do get a sense that they'll deliver on their threats and are a real danger. They're the types of villains that you really like to root against and can't wait to see them fail and get their comeuppance. I was listening to a Bill Burr interview where he was talking about watching a movie on the Criterion Channel around Halloween. It was about vampires and it featured Christopher Walken and Lily Taylor, which was motivation enough for me to look up The Addiction and watch it. Unfortunately, there wasn't that much Christopher Walken in the movie, but I didn't regret watching it. Kathleen is a philosophy doctoral student. One evening, she gets cornered by a woman and bitten on the neck. Soon after, she begins to feel certain changes. She has also awakened a thirst for blood, pushing her to acquire her own victims, and at the same time, her situation compels her to question the way she views the world. Now, I'm sure that part of that very vague description is something you've heard time and time again within the horror genre, especially when dealing with vampirism. What sets this movie apart is its very philosophical approach to the subject matter, in part because of the main character's studies. The juxtaposition of musings on the nature of evil, quotes from Sartre or Nietzsche, the violent imagery from genocides, the talk about addiction and mortality. They center the film in Kathleen's headspace and make it a more personal story of self-discovery and self-analysis, rather than one that explores the vampire mythos. She gains clarity on her addiction when writing her dissertation, noting that she drinks to escape the fact that she's an alcoholic. Existence is the search for relief from her habit, and her habit is the only relief she can find. We're used to films telling and retelling Dracula or Nosferatu, or establishing complicated lore, getting hung up on the rules of vampirism, or even having complex fights or kills. And there's nothing wrong with that. But this one feels different from the rest, and that's what I think makes it an underrated gem. It has its moments of bloodshed, not much gore, but that isn't the point anyway. The Addiction is more interested in the why of it all. If slower-paced, introspective movies aren't your thing, you might not like this one. But if you want to watch a relatively short art house vampire film, or maybe ease someone into horror, you should give this one a chance. I was debating whether or not to include Angel Dust as part of this list because I could already see the "this isn't horror" or "this is just a psychological thriller" type comments. But this is my list, so here we go. Every Monday at 6 p.m., right in the midst of the Tokyo rush hour, a murder occurs. In each case, the victim has been a young woman, injected with a fast-acting poison. A special detective has been called to investigate the case. Her unorthodox approach places her in the killer's mindset, and has led her to believe that her ex, a psychologist that specializes in deprogramming cultists, might somehow be involved. Angel Dust is very distinct from the horror movies that were coming out of Japan in the 90s, because it doesn't deal with technophobia, it doesn't deal with the supernatural, and it doesn't deal with a viral curse. Hell, it doesn't really have that much action either, but what it does expertly well is mood, ambiance, and tension. There's a scene at a laundromat where a woman is transfixed by a noisy dryer. She notices the clock is about to strike 6. We hear the killer's whistling, calling back to the classic film M. The camera focuses on the woman, and as she slowly turns around, we realize it's too late. No musical cues, no jumps, no dialogue, just well-placed shots and sound design that create foreboding. The cinematography juxtaposes the crammed streets and trains with a cold man-made sprawling city, enforcing the theme of isolation. The sound and absence of sound, along with the dreamlike sequences and flashes, add to the sense that the detective is getting in too deep and might be close to losing her mind. This is a very slow and understated psychological horror that's more interested in creating a sense of loss, emptiness, and dread rather than startling us. It really is a shame that this film isn't available on streaming and doesn't have a high-def physical release. I never watched The Faculty when it was first released. I just watched little bits and pieces here and there. I didn't actually sit down to watch it until last year. The first thing that really surprised me was the amount of recognizable faces in the cast. Usher, Selma Hayek, Jon Stewart, and so many more. The second thing was the tone. The movie poster always gave me the idea that this was a horror movie more on the drama side of the spectrum and not a campy monster movie. Harrington High looks like your average high school. You've got your borderline abusive football coach, the different cliques, budgeting difficulties, the works. Beyond the normal high school weirdness, it's the teachers that begin acting stranger than usual. After some out-of-the-ordinary interactions with a few of the students, some of them begin to believe that the faculty has been taken over by aliens. Although they come from different backgrounds and social circles, a few students band together to save their school, all while trying to figure out who is human and who has been taken over. From the start, we see that this is a very heightened and over-the-top world. It's in the dialogue, the music, the characters' reactions, everything. It's a movie that doesn't take itself seriously and is self-aware, in the same way that Scream is aware that it's a slasher movie and has to obey a few rules. The characters in The Faculty know that they are dealing with an invasion of the body snatcher situation, and even reference the movie. I think that The Faculty didn't shine as much as it could have because it was released on Christmas Day, and also probably got buried under all of the Scream imitations and teenage slashers that came out in the second half of the 90s. But it has a following and even an upcoming remake. It's a fun movie to watch with a group of friends, especially if you grew up in the 90s and want to reminisce about the era's very bad CG, alt-rock heavy soundtrack, Buffy the Vampire Slayer-like teen dramas, or maybe just to make fun of Josh Hartnett's self-cut hairstyle. If Ravenous would have been released in the last decade, I think it would have been known as some A24 prestige-like film because it's such a departure from what was popular at the time. It's a western that deals with cannibalism, touches upon the myth of the Wendigo, and also goes a little bit into existentialism. Captain Boyd received a promotion after defeating the enemy during the Mexican-American War. Seeing that the only reason that he was able to get behind enemy lines in the first place was because he froze and played dead, he was sent to Fort Spencer, where there wasn't much renown to be gained. One night, a survivor from an expedition stumbles upon the fort, half dead and half frozen. He tells the story of how his party got stranded, and their need for survival forced them to eat the horses, the dogs, and eventually the dead. The survivor explains that the expedition leader has been killing the other survivors in order to eat them. The soldiers are bound by duty to go find the leader, exact justice upon him, and save whoever remains. That small snippet is just the tip of the iceberg because so much happens after that I don't want to spoil. I genuinely enjoyed every bit of this movie. Ravenous feels like this greedy period piece, but it also has its stylistic and offbeat moments that break the dreariness. The soundtrack is at times uniquely hopeful, which contrasts with a dark subject matter, but doesn't clash with it. It's melancholic and beautiful, which seems odd, especially when talking about a movie where at a moment, a cannibal is preparing a stew made of all the people he just killed. It has its fair share of gore, violence, and blood. But what I liked the most were the moments when the hero and the antagonist faced off and tried to justify their worldviews and their actions. If you like subgenre mashups that don't entirely conform to one specific type of movie, I really think you should give Ravenous a shot. For the next movie on our list, we'll be looking at the first feature-length film from one of my favorite directors' filmography. Long ago, there was an alchemist who invented a device that could prolong life. Many years after the alchemist's death, an elderly antique dealer happens upon the same insect-like machine and uses it. Not only does he have to contend with the changes his body is experiencing, but he is also being pursued by a dangerous man that is tasked with bringing the device to his dying uncle. Let me start by saying that Cronos is not as polished or refined as Guillermo del Toro's later works, but that's actually part of the film's charm. Even though they're not always home runs, I enjoy watching a story director's earlier films because I like to see the early hints of greatness and the themes that they like to get back to. With regards to Cronos, you can tell that this is a talented storyteller that is still figuring out his craft. It does, however, still contain Del Toro's signature dark modern fairy tale gothic horror ambiance. He knows how to disturb you without having to be too extravagant. One scene in particular does the job. When the protagonist is in the washroom and notices the man with the nosebleed, he can't take his eyes off the blood. Then as he gets close to the counter, he's interrupted before he can scoop any into his mouth. But it doesn't stop there, because he notices the drops on the floor. He goes all the way down and sensually licks the blood. The protagonist is likable, he has a sweet relationship with his granddaughter, and you feel for his predicament. But the standout is Ron Perlman's character. You could say that he enjoys being the villain. He chews up every scene he's in, and even does so in Spanish. Like with any Del Toro film, it's best served when watched without distractions and while paying attention to the little details. I particularly liked why he chose to have an insect-like mechanism to be the vessel of eternal life, how he compares certain of Christ's miracles to what insects are capable of. This is a film where there are many layers to peel back because Del Toro always has meaning behind the motifs, the colors, and the symbolism. When done well, anthologies can be very effective because you have 4 seemingly unrelated short stories with varying tones and subgenres, and once the main storyline wraps up, the reason behind the shorter tales is revealed, and everything comes together either with a twist or a punchline. Which is the case for Tales from the Hood, because it's actually one of the better horror anthologies out there. 3 drug dealers head to a funeral parlor to collect a shipment from the director, Mr. Sims. Once inside, the director leads them through the parlor while taking the time to show them some of the bodies and explaining how they ended up there. First of all, Clarence Williams III does a great job as a funeral director, from beginning to end. He is both captivating and mysterious. Overall, it feels like 4 R-rated Goosebumps or Are You Afraid of the Dark stories with underlying moral social issues while produced by Spike Lee. It's probably the type of movie Jordan Peele would make or be involved in if it were to have been released these days. Sure, there might not be much nuance, it's loud and in your face, but you have to remember that although these are social issues that we still live with today, they were issues at the forefront of the news back when the movie came out, due to the Rodney King arrest and subsequent riots, the O.J. Simpson trial, David Duke's political campaigns, and so on. The real-life horror of these social issues, mixed with the supernatural or folk tales, reinforces the message that's being delivered and reframes it in a more palatable way. It doesn't sacrifice storytelling for the sake of teaching you a moral lesson. What brought the last movie on our list to my attention was simply a still from the film where we see the serial killer in full costume. That button-eyed mask with the mouth zipper on the side freaked the hell out of me, so naturally, I had to find out where it was from and watch the movie. Nightbreed has a lot going on, so I'm going to try to keep it short without revealing much. Aaron Boone has always been drawn to Midian, the land of the monsters. One day, he finally goes to that land and is changed forever. His destiny becomes entwined with that of the creatures, and he must help them survive when the real monsters of the story try to wipe them out. Clive Barker wanted Nightbreed to be a Star Wars of horror, and although that is a tall order for any seasoned filmmaker, he did manage to create a visually striking world that feels real and lived in. The Midian cemetery looks ancient and decrepit, like the doorway to a land that was destroyed and whose inhabitants are forced to live in the shadows out of fear. Danny Elfman's score also helps to add to the fantastical and otherworldly feel, especially when the variety of Nightbreed creatures is on the screen. Nightbreed is hard to classify because it pulls from a few horror subgenres. There's some slasher elements, some body horror, gore, violence, interesting creature designs. And also it serves as an allegory for the persecution of outcasts of society. It's a creative, campy, and nightmarish adventure that should please anyone that's looking for a horror movie that's still holding on to that 80s cheese while diving into the 90s angst. Also, David Cronenberg as an off-his-rocker and low-key horny psychiatrist should be reason enough to want to watch it. And with that comes to an end our underrated 90s horror list. Had you already heard of all 10 of them? I hope I at least piqued your interest for one of the movies. Please let us know down in the comments which one of these is your favorite. Or give us your own underrated 90s recommendation. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you haven't done so yet. Until next time.